Welcome back to Out of the Blue, the podcast, where we celebrate those unexpected moments that change our lives and lead us towards healing, purpose, and connection. I'm Vernon West, and I'm here with my co-host, my son Vernon West III, the creative force behind our logo, our theme music, and so much of the soul of the show. Today, we are thrilled to welcome back one of our favorite guests, one of our favorite addiction ninjas, Dr. Nicole Labor. Dr. Labor is a physician, educator, advocate, and one of the clearest voices in the fight against addiction and the stigma that surrounds it. Her new book, The Addictaholic Reconstructing, takes us beyond understanding addiction and into the next great challenge: how to rebuild a meaningful, joyful life in recovery. She's on the front lines every day helping people heal, helping families understand, and helping communities replace shame with truth and hope. Today, we'll talk about her new book, Reconstruction Really Means, and the latest from the front lines of the war on addiction. Please join us in welcoming back Dr. Nicole Labor right here, right now on Out of the Blue, the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me back. It's nice to see you. Nice to be back with you.
Our honor, it really is an honor. Um, so, so where have you been since the last time we spoke? Because it was
I mean, same shit,
same
you
shit,
know,
different day,
bigger pile.
bigger pile. Isn't that that's what they say about a PhD, pile it higher and deeper. That's what they used to call
It's
it.
true. Yeah, no, just same thing, a lot of clinical work, a lot of um social media work, a lot of public education work. Same stuff.
Yeah, and I love your social media stuff because it's very educational. It's illuminating stuff. It's really spreading some important messages. Now, you've been out in Akron. You still at the hospital that Dr. Bob was at, or did you move from there?
No, yeah, they closed that hospital a couple of years ago, and they moved the detox unit over to the main campus of the hospital. But I haven't worked there in probably 8 years.
But what you mentioned it to us on the last podcast, you maybe just mentioned you had worked there, I guess.
Yeah, it was where I started my career, and
Okay, there you go. That's what it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
I worked there for probably 8 years, and then when I got pregnant, I left because when you're working in a hospital and detox, you're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I couldn't really do that with a newborn. And
Well, anybody that knows anything about the big book of AA and anything like that would agree that's an auspicious way to begin a career in this kind of field, because where else? The place that the the magnum opus of recovery it was born.
I was like Dr. Bob reincarnated. Like that was my job.
Right? That's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, woo. I mean, I know you didn't mean that. So, folks, she's kidding. Okay, this is the doctor that says fuck a lot. She fucks
That's
around with you.
right.
She will fuck around with you. So don't worry about that. She's not woo-wooing that she used to. She's reincarnated Dr. Bob, you crazy motherfucker. So don't even think that. So you were there so many years. That's an amazing thing anyway. And now, where are you now?
I work, so I'm the medical director of a bunch of several different facilities. So like one in Worcester, Ohio, where we have residential treatment, outpatient treatment. You know, I I'm there. We have a residential and outpatient treatment center in Akron that I also work at, and then there's a statewide agency that I work with that does again a lot of mental health and addiction, both inpatient and outpatient, just different places. So I'm a little bit all over the place.
And mental health and addiction go hand in hand in so many ways. I mean, um, because I mean, we were talking a few seconds ago, minutes ago, we were talking how when you have some long-term sobriety, not enough attention is given to that. But going back to the part that people do focus on, the early sobriety, which is what you're steeped in, right? Your world is comprised of dealing with a lot of that. And that
Yes.
still is the front lines. That is where the rubber does hit the road. There is no long-term sobriety without that. And let's face it, that is a beautiful thing, long-term sobriety. That's the fruit of the garden of the 12 steps. Um, and I, I believe in so much in the 12 steps. I mean, not in a woo-woo kind of way. I believe in them as scientifically. I think that they do actually, if you do them thoroughly and you are absolutely rigorously honest to a fault, like you do the best you can't think of anything else, and you do each step like that. It is an amazing thing that happens. And then you get Bobby Flay in to help you with the cake recipe, and you
Right.
get and you get a recipe, you get a cake, man, and you're talking something you never would have expected. I personally was completely blown away by the cake. I mean, because I was just doing everything. I was so desperate when I came into sobriety, wanting sobriety. I was like a pit bull, give me that sobriety. I didn't know how I was going to get it. I didn't know how this stuff was going to work. Quite frankly, I didn't think it was going to work, but I figured they're doing it, just going to do it. I have no other way, but I couldn't think of anything else. Believe me, I tried, and I did it so hard. But then when I wasn't looking, it's almost like when I wasn't looking, all of a sudden I realized it happened. I got no more obsession, no relieved of that pretty early on, but not that, but what happened after that was something beautiful that it became like I loved life again. I mean, that's the thing that blew me away because I used to love life a lot because I was a pretty innocent kid. Um, I was a really, my classmates voted me president of my class. I was a nerdy, smart kid. I wrote the really great class history. Someone told me about it not long ago that I had everybody roll on the floor because I was pretty funny. And then I was also became a musician. I covered all the bases as a kid, but I stayed really innocent and pure. And even though it started going into my music career, it was that innocent and purity that got me this big opportunity where I opened for Bonnie Raitt, totally out of the blue. And played for 12,000 people. And next thing you know, I was, we were hot. And then I was not prepared because I was California sober. I was California sober. My father had died from drinking, and I was smoking pot. I said, "No, it's not booze. It's not going to kill me, but it does something. It definitely does something, and it makes you not use your full total intuition on yourself, and uh, you're not in tune. You're just not aligned anymore with the true self once you throw something like that in there. Me personally, I'm not going to judge anybody out there who's California sober. No judgment here. But for me personally, I never would have got the 12 steps. I never would have been able to if I didn't strip all that away and not have any go-to relieving of my pain. Because that's what it's about, really, pain. Because I think that childhood trauma, in my case, set me up for addiction. And it was not only that, but my dad was an alcoholic too. But that was part of my childhood trauma, not for nothing. But do you find that to be true when you're out there in the world getting the young kids or people coming into detox now? Same thing, or is it different?
Yeah, I would say that most people have some degree of trauma. I just think that the issue that we run into is like understanding that every brain is different and the way that one person's brain interprets something as traumatic may be very different from the next. So it becomes really hard to kind of pinpoint or say like, well, yeah, you didn't have trauma or whatever. But really anything can be perceived by the brain as trauma. So, people may go through something in childhood that everyone else objectively looking at is like, that's not traumatic. But for that person, their brain changed during that time and they internalized it as something traumatic. And so, yeah, I think everybody to some degree has something traumatic that every person with addiction, at least, has something or some sort of traumatic thing. And again, it may not be some like catastrophic, physical abuse or something like that. And it sometimes takes a long time to kind of find it because,
Yeah,
it may seem
yeah, I'm not sure I had a.
benign.
Yeah, I agree with that so much because I don't think I had a real big traumatic thing. At least I've tried to done everything in my hypnotism, everything to try to find out if there was, but I can't. I can't find any real childhood abuse thing that happened other than my dad. He was an alcoholic, so he did things like beat the shit out of me in front of my friends when I was 12. That's trauma. But I mean, the um the thing about pain that I was talking about before it became picked up any weed was I didn't know I was in a pain. I think that was the thing I didn't know. And that when I read your first book, that opened my eyes to that, and I really didn't realize it. And I've shared about it uh, for other people now in meetings and stuff that I didn't know how much pain I was in. I really didn't know until I found something that relieved it. And then all of a sudden it was like, what? You mean people feel like this? What was I missing? Life is good? You mean you don't have to walk around feeling this all the time? I couldn't believe it. And I was a nerd, so I knew everything about it. I said, the molecule, hydrocannabinol, and oh my God, yeah, ad nauseum. But so your book, the first book, if people who are going to get the second book, and people listening, you have to get the second book. It is definitely the New Testament as opposed to the Old Testament. And
Okay. Yeah.
the Old Testament talks about really, really, it's that punishing God of the Old Testament. It's definitely something very real. The first book is so real and gritty and down to, but it covers everything. It covers the brain chemistry. And you have that analogy of the people in the field catching the balls. That is the best analogy I've ever heard. So tell us again that wonderful analogy about the dopamine receptors and the people in the field, because it really works.
Well, and I'll say like so the first book, Deconstructed, that was like really a labor of love. Like I was so entrenched in that educating about addiction to the point of like moving the dial on stigma. Like that was the goal. I want everyone to really understand the brain science here in a way that's palatable for normal people, not just weird, nerdy, scientists. To really grasp what's happening in the human brain when addiction occurs. And so it is like I talk a lot about my story, and there is detail, and I tried to get really in depth,
Yeah, that
so
does that. Yeah.
yeah. And well, and I also want to say, like, that book was written in 2019, so before 2020, before
Boo.
everyone lost their ability to focus and read, and
Mhm.
so it was more in depth because it was written for an audience that could read like that. The newer book is actually was written with this idea in mind that people now only consume bite-sized information. And so the style of writing and the conceptualization of things is different in this book.
You're making me afraid. This kind of makes me afraid that I've become that person too, because because when I read it, I was going, "This is reading so good."
It's
So,
so easy to read, right? Because yeah, that's right. Because that's how we are now. We're just like we consume small things. But you'll notice as you read through the new book, it starts out very like short bullet points, like these are, and as you get longer and longer into like the Thrive chapters, that starts to get more in depth, like the first book, because the hope is that if you're in the Thrive portion of your recovery and life, then you do have the attention span and ability.
a little bit more than a gnat. You've gotten
Right,
some attention span. Yeah.
right. So in the addict in both of them, I use the analogy, or I talk about the dopamine receptors, and essentially we have a ball field, and that is your reward center, and your baseball field is full of players, and they're standing there with their mitts up, and there's, let's say, 100 players in the field, so the field's saturated with players. And in order for your brain to say, I like this is something I want to do again, at least 10 players have to catch a ball. So every time you do something enjoyable, your brain dumps a bunch of balls into the field, a bunch of dopamine into the field. And if 10 players catch a ball, you go, okay, I like this. I want to do it again.
Now that's
So
where's the glutamate come in?
glutamate's a different area of the brain.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's happening at a different level.
Does it coordinate with the dopamine receptors in some way? It's happening simultaneously. What is that?
Yeah, so what where glutamate would fit into this would be every time balls get thrown into the field, glutamate is the announcer at the stadium going, "Holy crap, did we see what just happened there? Let's write that down, folks. Like,
Yep,
keep
yep,
in mind."
yep.
Okay. So that's glutamate. It's logging the cue with the response.
Okay.
So you do something you enjoy, like go to a baseball game or, you know, hang out with your family or whatever, something that you enjoy. You dump like 25 balls in that field, 30 balls in the field. And so 10 players probably will catch a ball because they're pretty packed in there. But what happens when you start using substances, highly rewarding substances, including your California Sober THC molecule, they all dump, let's say, 100 to 200 balls in that field.
Yes, they do.
And so when you repeatedly do that over and over and over, your team manager goes, okay, I'm not going to keep paying salaries on all these players. Too
Working too,
expensive.
working too hard.
Need them, starts pulling them off the field. So the receptors downregulate. And eventually you're left with, let's just say, 12 players on the field total. And now they're scattered and they're few and far between. So now when you go to a baseball game or you do something that you enjoy, you play your guitar or whatever, you dump your 25 or 30 balls into that field like you used to. Well, those 10 players that need to catch them probably aren't going to get to them in time before they get sucked back out of the field. So you no longer enjoy things that were previously enjoyable.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
can no longer get joy from things that are naturally enjoyable because anything natural is going to release 20 balls or so.
Right,
So the only way that you ever feel normal anymore is when 200 or 150 balls are thrown into that field. And so that the remaining 10 or 12 players are able to get to a ball in time.
right,
But because it's only 10 players catching balls, you can't ever feel any more pleasure than that.
right.
So you kind of just stagnate, you become tolerant. You can't have that euphoria anymore. And now you're using to feel normal, but you're really just using to escape feeling shitty from not having the balls.
Yes, sir. That's exactly the path that happens, right? I mean, I can remember it clear as bell, because I definitely I like to remember that. I want to never forget that because yeah, because that's helpful. That keeps me sober. It keeps me appreciating sobriety. I love sobriety. I really love it. I love the way you talked about moving the needle on stigmatizing it because it's so important an issue in my mind is the stigma that it all has. It's stopping any kind of it's such a impediment to helping people, and still is. Um, you mentioned harm reduction in this book as well as part of some of the things, and there's a capital H harm reduction, and there's this these lowercase. Now, we had a guest on, Gary Langes, who's that's his gig. I mean, he's a harm reduction person for Northeast U.S., New England, and he started. He's the one that pioneered getting uh, the naproxen, with
Naloxone.
naloxone, right? He pioneered that. They wouldn't he got cops to take it with them in their cars because they encountered people that OD'd, and at first they wouldn't. It was illegal and they wouldn't do it. Then he went to Washington. So the hoops he had to jump through just to help people. And he's all about harm reduction, providing safe IV sites, clean works and all of that. I mean, it's such a stigma that people don't, they'd rather they don't want them in their city. If there's, they want to open one, they don't like they want all these junkies coming here, these dirty, rotten. There's business people. There's all kinds of people that get hooked on drugs. It's not just whatever you stigmatize is so wrong. I think it paints a picture of someone who's been caught in the web of addiction that doesn't take into consideration that it goes from what and from Yale to jail, we used to say. It doesn't matter. Anybody is susceptible to addiction. And for the mindset to be stigmatizing it, man, that's such a good work to do to destigmatize it. How do you think that has changed? Do you think that needle has changed at all? What do you think? Have you moved it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think to a large degree we have done an okay job in moving the stigma. I think that there's still, obviously it's still out there, right? And it still does exist, but I also think that I think with the birth of whatever you want to call it, of the opioid epidemic, as much as I hate to call it that because I hate to focus on singular drugs, I do think that whole period of time forced people to sort of start looking at this as a problem that anybody could have because it became mainstream and like the media was talking about it and people were, the people who were suffering from opioid use disorder were like your neighbor or people that you didn't typically associate like as that type of person.
Right.
And so it did start opening the door for people who had been keeping it like inside because they had shame or whatever, like advocating more and trying to do more. So I do think that we have moved the needle a little bit.
I think
I
you
still
have.
think we got a long way to go. I have, I on social media, I have a large following on social media, and that means I get a lot of comments. And one of the most, in my opinion, one of them, because there are people out there that are just like, no matter what you do, they're going to be like, no, addicts are scumbags. Like, there's nothing
Yep.
you can do to change their minds, right? But
Okay.
just like there's people out there that are going to be like racist and there's nothing you can do because they're just dumb, right? Like,
Yep.
okay, I can't change you. Um, you the people that are the most stigmatizing to me are a lot of the people who had maybe problematic use of substances in their lives, but were able to just stop at some point. And they didn't necessarily have what I call like the true addiction where they had the brain changes. And so they are using for years and years and maybe had some problems from their use, but ultimately at some point they're like, oh, I'm done. I'm not using anymore. Time to grow up, and they put it down. And then they're the ones online going, I've been sober 20 years. I didn't have to use any program. I didn't go to therapy. I didn't have to do anything. I just found a better life. And I don't even call, whatever. I'm in recovery for 11 years. And I'm always like, well, what are you in recovery from then?
Right.
Like, what
Yeah.
was the problem? You were choosing to use drugs and then you stopped. Like,
Yeah.
where did the recovery happen? So, but those are the people that are the hardest to really get through to. Like, no, I understand you used cocaine for 20 years. I get it. I get that you were hardcore into the scene. But if you put it down and walked away one day because you decided enough was enough, you technically probably didn't have addiction. So you don't qualify in the same way as this guy over here who's in tears because he cannot pull himself out of the trap house. Like, there's a difference.
There's a huge
And
difference. Yeah.
yeah, and it's really hard to like, so I have better luck getting non-addicted people or people who don't really use substances problematically to understand that than I do the people who used substances and just think that they were magically able to get better and therefore everyone else could too. So that's kind of where I feel like the stigma really it remains heavily. Um, and that's a hard push.
It really is.
What do you do usually to bridge that gap? Have you ever had a successful situation where you were able to get through to someone in that way or in like the masses?
I would say that there have been like individual cases, even like on social media, like in the comment section, if I'm like bothering to have the discussion where I've been able to kind of recognize someone being a little more open-minded. And I give them that information. Like if I took you and I put you in a brain scanner, and I took this guy and put him in a brain scanner, you guys both used cocaine for 20 years, your brains are going to look different because you were able to stop and he wasn't. Like there's a difference. And so sometimes I do think that they're able to hear that and go, oh, okay, I guess I was just really lucky, but more often than not, they just double down. So
They just don't get it. It is almost like same thing as racism. It's like they don't recognize another physical condition, like that they just don't see it. And yeah, how do you change that? But what we can do, maybe, what I love about this new book too is, and I have a bunch of things I want to touch on, but what I love about it is that it's almost like recovery isn't just recovery; it's living life on a level of connection and alignment that makes it more deeply appreciated. That joy becomes a larger component. I mean, are these people who say this, are they really living life like that? I mean, that I wonder might be the way to connect people. That if they could see that maybe they're not. I mean, maybe they were able to stop this using and they don't have the same brain as the guy who got addicted. But maybe there's other things in their life that they're just as fixated on and that have taken their joy and diverting them. Because I mean, to me, the most joyful people that I've ever met, I know, I'm sure you have, like a guy that was a guru. I knew this guy, he devoted his life to meditating and meditating with people. He's such a serene human being, always about being of service, but also with boundaries. I love the way you say, if you truly got your shit together, you're not going to say yes to everything. Sometimes you can say no. All right, now I don't have time for that. But come back when I'm ready to hear it. Maybe we'll talk. But I mean, but that's a sign of a sort of a realized person, an actualized human being. And I don't know what these people that are talking this way, because if they were even close to being a realized human being, they would have empathy for these other individuals who are struggling, because I think that's a big part of what happens. I think myself, I speak for a lot of people that I know who've been through recovery, and maybe you, I think you too, absolutely. A lot of this is driven because we do empathize, because we know what they're going through. And I always say that one of the best things about my past is that it's something I can use to connect with people. I always say you're turning the shit into gold. You're able to turn it into something that can make connection with somebody struggling, and then they might get to the point where they'll listen to you. They may, well, if you did it, maybe I can. That's about the best usage of the crap that I went through I can think of. It's not really something I want to talk about too much, except just for that reason. But it doesn't serve me any purpose to dwell on it, other than to realize that I'm grateful today for not having that burden.
I think it's a lot of like people don't know what they don't know. So if, they never reached that point of severe desperation, like where they wanted desperately to stop and were unable to do so, they didn't have that. They reached the point where enough was enough and they wanted to stop and then they just did. So they don't know what it feels like to be that person crying with a needle in your arm because you fucking don't want to do this again, but yet here you are. So if they don't know that experience because they've never gone through that experience, then they're not going to be able to relate. And yes, I would think that, and it's true. It seems like reasonably open-minded, intelligent people are willing to hear that and say, okay, yeah, I didn't have that, and so maybe it is something different, and I feel fortunate. But people just don't know what they don't know. And so I try not to hold it against them. But again, I post a lot of videos that say things like, the caption on the screen will be like, addiction is not a choice. Addiction is a disease. And I talk about the brain chemistry, and I talk about the fact that it's not like, yes, you choose to use substances, but ultimately you don't choose whether you're going to have the brain change or not. And once it occurs, You can't just undo it. That's the disease part. And so, but just that caption alone invites people to come in and start, you know, criticizing. And I used for 25 years and I put it down. It's a choice. It's totally not a disease. Stop giving people excuses, you know, and a lot of that. So I just think,
I'm making a moral issue. That's what they do.
again, people don't know what they don't know, you know.
Out of the Blue, the podcast, hosted by me, Vernon West, co-hosted by Vernon West III, edited by Joe Gallo, music and logo by Vernon West III. Have an Out of the Blue story of your own you'd like to share? Reach us at info@outoftheblue-thepodcast.org. Subscribe to Out of the Blue on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and on our website, outoftheblue-thepodcast.org. You can also check us out on Patreon for exclusive content.